Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar. My name's Alan Platt and I'm going to talk to you today about some of the tools and techniques that we can use in order to prevent cybercriminals from becoming a major problem for our businesses. I'll also talk about some of the tools and techniques that cybercriminals themselves use in order to try to get access to your all-important critical company data. I hope this presentation will take between 20 and 30 minutes and there'll be time afterwards for questions. First thing is, most companies are well aware that cybersecurity is a big and growing problem. Lots of companies have been hitting the headlines over the last few years, and the scale of some of these data breaches can be extremely large. For example, there was an attack on more than 100 banks that resulted in losses of more than £650 million worldwide. Marriott, for example, last year had a data breach affecting the details of more than 500 million customers. And we've all heard the dozens of public examples of companies such as Yahoo, TalkTalk, Sony, BA, Equifax, Currys, the NHS. The list goes on and on. The public sector themselves have been hit with major problems, including the NHS WannaCry attack on the NHS recently, and this year an attack on the Police Federation, which saw large quantities of data being deleted. The government itself is demanding significantly more is spent on cybersecurity to defend the NHS and critical services. And of course, with the advent of GDPR regulations coming into force from May last year, that significantly ups the ante on cybersecurity, introducing very large fines for data breaches that can be up to 4% of global turnover. Not only that, the ICO and their European counterparts are starting to show that they really have teeth. On this slide, I just talked through some of the numbers that I've been seeing as I've been doing research into cybersecurity, and some of these are truly scary. As an example, 55% of UK companies have suffered some kind of cyber attack in 2019, and yet despite that, 3/4 of UK firms are rated by the National Cybersecurity Centre as cybersecurity novices. Some of the even bigger numbers that really worry me. On average, it takes companies 197 days to notice that they have suffered from a data breach, and this number is only increasing. That number was 168 days in 2018. And the average cost of a major cyber attack for UK and worldwide businesses is running at $3.68 million, according to research by the Ponemon Institute and IBM. Of course, a lot of this data is taken from big companies, but the reality for SMEs can perhaps be even more stark. Half of all SMEs who suffer a major data breach will go out of business within 2 years. And the reality is that insurance is no solution. Even if they do pay out on a claim, which is by no means guaranteed, who would work with a company that you no longer trust to keep your information safe? I'm going to spend a little time now talking about some of the cybersecurity technologies that are out there that attempt to keep your business safe. And I've roughly categorised these into 5 different areas here. I'll focus on each of these briefly, one at once. The first and probably most common type of cyber defence that most of us employ is endpoint protection, or more commonly called antivirus. Essentially, this uses a blacklisting technique, and other heuristics and other advanced technologies can be used, but fundamentally these are all spotting known bad patterns of behaviour in code in order to try to detect malicious code when it's running on your servers or on your laptops, detect that code and stop it before it can do any damage. The next category I'm going to talk about briefly is encryption. Encryption, a lot of people seem to think, is a panacea that solves all cybersecurity worries, but the reality is that's far from the truth. This includes several different types of encryption. Virtual private networks, which are talked about a lot in the media, protect data from snoopers as it moves over a network. Disk encryption, or more correctly called encryption at rest in many cases, is used to protect data on a hard drive, and that's fantastic for protecting a laptop or a USB data stick if they're lost or stolen, since the thieves can't access the data without the secure key. Both of these technologies have their place, and I strongly recommend and advocate their use. However, they aren't a complete security panacea for reasons we'll come on to later. The third area I'm roughly categorising as border security, and there are lots of things included in here. Most companies will have firewalls, perhaps password managers or two-factor authentication, which makes logons require 2 different factors, so not just a password, but perhaps a password and a code that can be transmitted to your mobile phone. In this area, I'll also include various other things such as vulnerability scanning or penetration testing, which a lot of companies employ to confirm that their defences are as good as they think they are. But again, all of these, I'm classifying them as border security because they're really testing your company's defences from the outside in. So it's looking at the boundaries of the systems that you're trying to protect. The fourth category I'm going to talk about briefly is network intrusion detection systems. These typically look for bad traffic on a network, and they're fantastic for stopping things like a brute force attack, where an attacker tries to crack your passwords by just throwing a dictionary at it. And they can also detect viruses or malware as it moves around a network. But for that to work, they still fundamentally rely on a blacklisting technology, very similar to endpoint protection and antivirus. They're looking for known bad code as it travels over your network. The final solution, which is probably the least commonly used of all of these solutions, is whitelisting. It uses a pre-authorized list of what's allowed to run on your servers and allows them to operate while blocking everything else. And that could be great for servers where you're in control of what's actually running, and yet despite that, it's an infrequently used technology. Now, the vast majority of businesses have antivirus, firewalls, encryption, two-factor authentication, and various other technologies in place, but the reality is it's not enough. All of those companies that we mentioned in previous slides had these and other protections in place, and yet despite that, they were still compromised. But the observant amongst you may have noticed what's been in the background of all of my slides so far: people. Cyber criminals are tunneling under the walls we're building around our IT infrastructure by focusing on the weak link in every cybersecurity system: people. We all make mistakes. We click on links that we shouldn't have done. We open emails that perhaps contain viruses without us noticing. Similarly, there's actually recent examples of security professionals getting it wrong. In a recent issue with Salesforce, for example, a mistake by a system administrator led to users being able to access critical account details from other companies, and that led to a very large shutdown on behalf of Salesforce that lasted more than 15 hours. The reality is that because all of our companies employ large numbers of people, it's not a case of if your defences are breached, but when. It's just a matter of time until you suffer from a data breach. I'm going to talk a little bit now about some of the attack methods that different cybercriminals will use in order to try to break through your defences. Probably some of the most basic ones will include things like a brute force attack. Essentially, this is where a cybercriminal will throw a bot or use a bot to throw a dictionary or servers in an attempt to break a password. Antivirus here simply won't help. It's not a virus. The best protection here is to use strong passwords that it's extremely difficult for a bot to break. And by strong passwords, I don't mean dictionary words with O's and I's replaced with ones and zeros. These are not good. They're almost some of the first things that a bot will attempt to use. The other problem with a brute force attack from the criminal's perspective as well is that it's actually very easy to spot. So many firewalls, a lot of servers, and a lot of good network intrusion detection systems will detect that multiple attempts have been made to log on to the same server and simply block any more attempts from that same address. Two-factor authentication is also perfect to stop this kind of attack dead in its tracks. Even if they do find a password, they need the second factor, for example a code sent to your mobile phone via a text message, and without that they simply can't get in. Also, whitelisting will also give you some good protection for central servers. It won't stop somebody logging in, but typically a criminal's next move will be to run a simple script to secure their foothold in your server and start to extract valuable information. And as soon as they run anything, whitelisting will pick them up. The second thing I'm going to talk a little bit about is a drive-by download. This is a catch-all term for one of many different types of malware, but it's one of the most common ways of getting malware onto your network. Typically, in this case, a user will click on a link on a website or an email that's infected with malware. The criminal is hoping to exploit weak cyber defences, and generally speaking, drive-by downloads and email attacks are actually fairly easy to defend against. The malware that's used is often pretty generic, and a good quality endpoint protection or antivirus can pick up these issues and stop them. Interestingly though, two of the other major defences that people employ actually offer very little help against viruses. Firewalls are almost entirely useless, since the laptop, for example, that gets infected by the virus is often already inside the company firewall and logged onto your critical system. Likewise, encryption offers little protection. VPNs, for example, just happily encrypt the virus or malware as it's transmitted to your laptop, where it will be decrypted and run anyway. Likewise, disk encryption doesn't really help, since you, the user, have already entered the password onto your laptop to tell it to decrypt the disk when you logged on, and the virus has access to all of the same files that you, the user, do. Self-replicating ransomware is an interesting niche of general malware, and WannaCry and other ransomware is a very good example of this type of thing. They get a lot of press, but they're often started, in fact, from a drive-by download or a click on link in an email. After that, though, the danger with these types of viruses is that they can use Windows vulnerabilities or other vulnerabilities inside your system in order to spread around your network and not just infect the first machine that they come across, but potentially affect multiple machines before triggering the ransomware payload. As was the case in the WannaCry attack, it didn't just affect one person's machine that was first infected with the virus, it actually affected many thousands of machines across the entire NHS network. And the best way of protecting against these self-replicating ransomwares is to keep your software and your servers patched. But again, endpoint protection, if it's well chosen, will usually pick up these types of attacks. They get a lot of press, but the majority of them are actually pretty easy to stop, provided you keep everything up to date. However, self-replicating malware often exploits a vulnerability in the operating system or in some of the software that your IT equipment is running. And the most common threats of these are pretty well covered by endpoint protection, as I said on my previous slide. But the problem is that new vulnerabilities are being found the whole time. It's an arms race between the cyber criminals and the antivirus vendors, and it's fundamentally one that can't be won. Brand new vulnerabilities are often found by the criminals first, and if they're careful, they can use these vulnerabilities to carefully hack multiple systems before the vulnerability is more commonly reported, and they could be inside your system for a long time before you notice. Eventually, as antivirus software vendors catch up, it may spot them, but is it going to be too late by that point? Encryption is also no help. Border security has already been breached by the time these vulnerabilities are exposed inside your system. If the criminal's careless, they may do something like download vast quantities of data really quickly, and that would trigger a well set up network intrusion detection system. But criminals know how to avoid triggering these systems. And more often than not, the network IDS won't see anything unusual. They just see data flowing around your network. They can't tell the difference between good and bad data flow. Whitelisting, on the other hand, can often pick up criminals who are using vulnerability exploits. Once a criminal uses this exploit or a zero-day vulnerability, they invariably change something on the server. It may only be one line of configuration, as was the case with the BA hack. However, that change will be flagged and give your security team the ability to look into detail about exactly what has changed and why. Insider attacks. I mentioned that people are actually the biggest single weak link in most cyber defences. And of course, spear phishing is an increasingly common tactic for cyber criminals. They can be extremely clever and very convincing, sometimes fooling even the most savvy IT professionals to divulge critical information. I had an example myself a couple of years ago where I received an email supposedly from my marketing director talking about a new product launch. The dates, times, facts, everything about the launch were correct, and the email said that he wanted me to look at a document that was attached to the email. I was only suspicious really because he was actually physically sitting next to me at the time, but this particular thing was a spear phishing email which fortunately I spotted, and the attachment that was sent with that email was full of bespoke malware aimed at trying to relieve me of my passwords and credentials. This type of attack, it's very easy to fall foul of. The criminals are not stupid, and they're basically targeting things using an awful lot of social media research before sending these emails so that they know their audience, they know who they're talking to, and they can make you believe that they are somebody who they say they are. Again, the problem is that the reality is you're not going to stop them getting in. Sooner or later, with any large organisation, somebody in your organisation is going to make a mistake. And the key thing here is to spot them quickly when they do get in. Remember that I said on average it takes around 6 months for a company to notice that they've been hacked? Well, that's where whitelisting can be a really good line of defence. As soon as somebody in your company falls foul of an attack such as spear phishing, those cyber criminals will make a change, and as soon as there's an unauthorised change happening within your system, you can cut the detection time from 6 months to 60 seconds. And of course, it's not just external attacks that can be spotted either. Actually, you can potentially stop insider attacks by using whitelisting and similar techniques. As an example, a little while ago, of an online gaming provider. In this case, an insider modified software as it was being deployed onto the server. It was an online poker game, and by modifying the software, it allowed them to cheat at the game online and siphon a lot of money out of the company by simply playing the game. Now, that particular person wasn't spotted for a considerable period of time. However, whitelisting could have identified that malicious change and that individual within seconds. The change was unauthorised, it hadn't been authorised by the right people, so you could have picked up this attack. So I've talked a lot about whitelisting and how whitelisting can actually help potentially improve and strengthen your cybersecurity. So let me talk a little bit about exactly what it is that we're doing at CyberHive. We're using a patented concept called distributed whitelisting, and it's built on a cryptographically secured audit trail. Essentially, every few seconds we create a digitally signed secure audit trail of everything that has run on your servers, when it ran and who ran it. That's then transmitted across to our verification servers, shown on the left of this diagram, where it's compared against a whitelist saying what's allowed to run, and any discrepancies will be instantly flagged. Using this technique, you can detect in seconds if anything runs on your servers that shouldn't have been there. But there are several pieces of secret sauce to this solution that makes it particularly useful. First thing is, I mentioned that we generate a cryptographically secured audit trail. We actually use hardware-based cryptography to digitally sign the audit trail as it leaves the server, and that means that audit trail is in itself it's not possible to change that audit trail without that falsifying the signature. And in this case, it means that it makes the technology itself virtually impervious to hacking. That audit trail, you know that the audit trail is secure. Similarly, by using multiple verification servers, we can actually eliminate single points of failure, and not just single points of technical failure, but if those verification servers are looked after by individual people, different people who don't have access to the other servers, we can even eliminate single points of human failure. Uniquely as well, by placing those servers outside of the control of the main servers that you're trying to protect, you can place those servers literally anywhere in the world. There could be some in London, some in Manchester, or the east coast of the US. And by doing this, you can even place them outside of the same services that are hosting your primary services. As an example here, you can actually verify the integrity of your servers independent of the cloud service provider. So if Microsoft, AWS or Google were using this technology, they couldn't even hack their own servers without you, the customer, knowing about it. There are numerous advantages to CyberHive's technology, and critically, this use of a distributed architecture prevents any one security slip from compromising the integrity of your servers, eliminating any single point of human failure. I mentioned it can also protect against malicious intent on the part of the IT, cloud service provider, or even your own authorized system administrators. It uses hardware cryptography, the Trusted Platform module, to guarantee the integrity of that audit trail, and that makes it virtually impossible to compromise. This technology has been developed by cybersecurity experts, the technology has been patented, and CyberHive is continuing to work with the University of Oxford under an Innovate UK funded grant to secure an ongoing collaboration and continue to strengthen and build on this technology. It's a technology that's highly valued by our customers, and we've recently been selected to provide the technology and the cloud platform for an entire British overseas territory, who are providing this platform on to their customers who are strong in online gaming, financial services, a high value security sector. This technology is available today to secure servers that are running on Linux. We can provide this either as an on-premise service or to secure servers that are running in the cloud, and this is built, as I mentioned, on a secure audit trail. Later in 2019, we're extending this technology to be able to provide security for platforms and services that are running on the VMware platform and on third-party public cloud platforms such as AWS and Microsoft. In 2020, we'll be extending the technology further to protect services that are running on Windows. And in the future, we also have new and advanced security techniques, including full encryption of entire running machines. More information about that nearer the time. So I've talked a lot about whitelisting, and is it a magic fix-all? Well, of course not. There are plenty of applications where it isn't appropriate, and I would strongly advocate that you should have antivirus, firewalls, two-factor authentication, and most importantly, staff training to stop people in your critical systems from making mistakes in the first place. But the reality is that mistakes can and do happen. So I believe, and we strongly feel, that whitelisting should be an important part of your toolkit that you should very seriously consider to strengthen security in your business. Sooner or later, cyber criminals will get through your best defences, and then how long will it take you to detect them, and how much data and money will you have already lost? So our ask of you: are you in an organisation which carry massive amounts of client data, whether it be online retail, banks, financial services, healthcare, hotels? Perhaps you're extremely protective of your IP, whether you're in the technology industry or the pharmaceutical industry. Or are you responsible for national security? If you can answer yes to any of these questions, we'd love an opportunity to discuss how we can help you prevent your business from becoming the next headline. Thank you very much for listening, and we greatly appreciate any questions.